Has Answers in Genesis gone polytheistic? Is James Madison now a god? I don't think that's what Roger Patterson meant, but it sure sounds that way to me. What I want to know is what you think. Is Patterson advocating for another god? Let's have a chat. Roger Patterson is one of the Answers in Genesis hosts for Answers News. He has a BS in education. But in this episode of Answers News, he demonstrates why AIG needs an attorney on the panel, as he completely botches the story on the new Texas abortion law by showing a lack of understanding for how our judicial system operates. While I must confess that I don't always stay in my own lane, I sometimes comment on science, Patterson's forte. At least I try to make sure that what I say is accurate. The story is several in from the start of the video, but we'll get there. Let's start at the beginning.
We're in full gear. We started a new science show, and ultimately it wound up being called Unlocking Science, and the initial goal was to do something for families so that they had some activities to do while kids couldn't be in school.
I included this so that you could see Roger's main focus, science education for children.
Booksellers Organization apologizes for promoting book on trans damage to children. So this has to do with the American Booksellers Association, and what they do every month, apparently, is they send out something that they call, it's called a white box. Well, they got in trouble when they sent Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, okay? Because how dare they send a book, right, that speaks against the idea of transgender and children, changing their gender.
If that was really what the book was about, I would be completely with you, Georgia. While I wouldn't agree with the position, I would also support a person's right to say so and write about why they think that. But the issues with this book are far deeper than your shallow claim that it is problematic for speaking about children changing their gender.
Well, and actually what the book does identifies a lot of the problems and dangers of hormone therapy and then what's happening to kids having surgery that are very young.
I wonder if Brian has read the book. I have not. So I can't say for sure what's in it, but I have read several reviews of the book. The reviews written by medical professionals are highly critical of it for its mischaracterization of the science of transgender medicine. What Brian is describing here is not done. No one is doing transition surgery on children. This is not an approved medical procedure for children, and if it were being practiced, it would be in violation of AMA standards. So if the book does in fact talk about what's happening with kids having surgery to change their gender, then the book has no basis in fact. From the reviews I have read and the book summaries, this isn't mentioned in any of them, nor is it mentioned in the article in LifeSite News that is the basis for Brian's remarks. More likely, Brian brings up gender transition surgery because it is a hot-button talking point that will score points with his audience.
The effects that are lifelong, how you really can't reverse those effects, and we're just making people aware.
And not opinion-based, but
right, just
based
fact-based,
in real research,
science-based, right? She's following the science.
Except she isn't. She isn't a scientist. She is a journalist. And her book isn't based on science and research. It's based on her interviews with the parents of trans kids. This is one of the biggest criticisms of the book. She didn't bother talking to the trans kids themselves, only their parents. The experience of a transgender child cannot be garnered by talking to a parent. I should know. I am a trans parent. And even as a supportive parent, I have no clue what my child feels with regards to his gender. I can't relate to those feelings. Most of the parents that Schreier interviewed were not supportive. The parents misgender their children and deny their identity. When this is the data you are working from, data from people who are not even seeing the problem, of course you end up with loads of misinformation. The only reason the book can sell is that some want to believe the misinformation and refuse to look at the real science. Just like our panel here. She does review some of the science on transgender treatments, but 3 reviews that I read from medical doctors who work in the field of transgender medical care all say that she misunderstands the science. Not surprising. Journalists frequently misunderstand technical fields they report on when they have no education in that field. Specifically, according to Jack Turbin, Schreier claims that in most cases, nearly 70%, gender dysphoria resolves, and thus youth should not be provided gender-affirming medical care. That statistic is false. Schreier incorrectly uses this statistic to claim that trans youth shouldn't be offered gender-affirming medical interventions because most will change their minds and later regret their decision. The studies Schreier refers to used an old diagnosis of gender identity disorder, not the DSM-5 diagnosis of gender dysphoria. The reason this is a problem is that one could meet the diagnosis without being transgender. The old criteria largely focused on gender expression. Think a tomboy or a cisgender boy who likes feminine toys. These kids aren't transgender, so it's not surprising that most of them weren't transgender at follow-up. This problem with the gender identity disorder diagnosis from the DSM-4 was fixed for the DSM-5. Furthermore, these studies were of very young prepubertal children. Under the current medical consensus, gender-affirming medical interventions are not offered to prepubertal youth. They are only offered after youth have reached adolescence. Once youth reach adolescence, it's rare for transgender youth to later decide that they are cisgender.
And so that's what the book's all about. And of course, because it goes against the popular cultural narrative that transgenderism is an ultimate good, well, then transgender activists are raising all sorts of cane because they promoted this book and they want to take it down. And they want to make sure that the American Booksellers Association repents of their awful sin of repudiating their ideology and makes concessions to get in line with their worldview.
The issue isn't that this book wasn't in line with the worldview of the culture that transgenderism is an ultimate good, and the American Booksellers Association failed to follow that narrative. The issue is that the book contains misinformation that can cause real harm to real people. Had the Booksellers Association included an anti-vax book, they would be doing the same thing. In this age of misinformation, we have people in positions where they ought to know better, telling us things that are wrong and sometimes dangerous, like that we can inject bleach to fight a virus. We can't. That will kill us. Sending out a book that contains misinformation that can cause parents to tell their transgender children that they aren't really trans, that they will grow out of this, or that encourages trans parents to misgender their children or to deny them medical care? Yes, this is a problem. It's not just that it's a bad idea. It's that it's misinformation that causes serious damage to children. From Dr. Eckert's second article on the book in Science-Based Medicine, pronouns matter not only for trans visibility and understanding. Research finds that for youth, their use can mean the difference between a distressing and positive experience. A 2018 study in the Journal of Adolescent Health found that those youth who could use their accurate names and pronouns had 71% fewer symptoms of severe depression, a 34% drop in suicidal thoughts, and a 65% decrease in suicide attempts.
But you'd think a group like this, the American Booksellers Association, they would want all these ideas disseminated. They want people to buy all types of books, read all types of different points of view, and be able to think for themselves.
To be educated.
Instead, they've become the curators of thought.
Says the man who signed a statement saying he would never talk about any view that wasn't in line with the biblical view of the organization that he works for. You are literally a group that is denied the right to express any opinion contrary to your group thought ideology, not just for those in teaching positions like you, Roger, but all through the organization, even down to the volunteers. And you are complaining about someone else not letting others think for themselves? How about if Answers in Genesis takes your advice and lets their people think for themselves?
And they're the ones who are going to tell you what you should be reading and what perspectives you should be listening to. And so we have this idea totally flipped on its head from what I think the initial idea of this group would have
Right.
been.
Says the man with the suggestion of what you should be reading and listening to propped up on the table, and the recommended resources at the end of every Answers in Genesis article, and the list of approved colleges for your kid to go to, etc., etc., etc.
Include hate speech. Now, that is a very strong accusation against this book, which was written in a very fair way, just representing the facts of the matter.
I skipped parts going into hate speech as there is too much to cover today to include everything, but I did want to address this claim that the book was written in a fair way, just representing the facts of the matter. First, did Roger read the book? I doubt it, as they don't even have a copy on the desk, nor does he reference anything to support his opinion that the book was written in a fair way. The publisher of this book speaks volumes about how fair it is. Rignory just wants to present facts in a fair way. They wouldn't want to push something like a conservative agenda or start debates now, would they? Nah. Oh, wait. Rignory want to read conservative books that drive headlines, start debates, and change the course of history? That's what Rignory books have done since 1947.
Trying to present this very radical new idea that pumping our young children full of hormones and blocking them from entering the natural process of puberty, all of these things are good for their bodies and good for their emotional well-being. All of those things are untested ideas. We don't know the long-term effects, and in the few cases where we do, we see very harmful effects from those things, both physiological and psychological and spiritual.
And once again, our science teacher makes up claims with nothing to back up his claims. My bet would be that he read someone saying that they had an issue. But at least give us some kind of source for that. What I'm finding is that yes, there can be long-term effects, but they are certainly minor compared to the deleterious effects of untreated gender dysphoria. According to St. Louis Children's Hospital, most experts, including our team, believe that puberty blockers are safe. The Endocrine Society and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health support the use of puberty blockers for kids who want to delay or prevent unwanted physical changes. Possible long-term side effects of puberty blockers: lower bone density. To protect against this, we work to make sure that every patient gets enough exercise, calcium, and vitamin D, which can help to keep bones healthy and strong. We also closely monitor patients' bone density. Delayed growth plate closure, leading to slightly taller adult height. Less development genital tissue, which may limit options for gender-affirming surgery, bottom surgery, later in life. According to a New York Times article on the subject, the long-term effects on bone density, brain development, and fertility are not yet known. However, transgender adolescents receiving puberty blockers had less emotional behavioral problems than transgender adolescents recently referred to care, and also reported rates of self-harm and suicidality similar to those of their non-transgender peers. So Roger is right that we do need more study on the long-term effects, but not knowing all the long-term effects is a far cry from these being untested ideas. The science behind the use of puberty blockers for transgender youth has been tested, and there is broad consensus from the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health that gender-affirming medical care is appropriate for transgender youth so long as clinicians follow the guidelines set forth by these major medical organizations, according to Dr. Turbin. The only way to determine long-term effects is to continue to use and study these medications. We know there are very real, even life-saving short-term effects. This alone is reason to pursue this avenue of treatment. When I have numerous doctors telling me that this is a safe and effective treatment, and a children's science teacher with no data, no studies, and no references to any sources claiming that they are all wrong and that this is really harmful, I think I will stick with the doctors.
Well, Georgia, you call this all the time what? This experiment on the kids.
It's the largest medical or scientific experiment done on children that is basically going along with the government's approval of it and even the parents' approval at many levels. And I just think it's so sad because I really do think, give it about 5, maybe 10 years at the most, we're going to see some pretty horrific things come out of this.
What's really sad is that you mischaracterize science in fields that aren't yours. Georgia has a PhD in molecular genetics, not an MD, trying to persuade people not to believe their doctors. The use of puberty blockers for the treatment of gender dysphoria is not an ongoing scientific experiment. As I showed you from the testimony of several doctors, this is well-established, science-based medicine. Do we have all the answers on it? No, but that doesn't make it experimental. Chemotherapy has only been around since the 1980s, about the same time that we started using puberty blockers in children. Is chemotherapy an experimental treatment? In one sense, it is, as there are always studies going on to develop our understanding of this therapeutic medicine. But this doesn't mean that all chemotherapy is experimental and we shouldn't trust it. There are numerous harmful side effects from chemotherapy, but the benefits outweigh the harm. Puberty blockers have far fewer harmful effects and can be a life-saving treatment. So stop trying to pretend that it is otherwise because you heard about something somewhere that you can't even reference.
These children saying, what were you thinking? Right? Why did you let me mutilate my body?
Puberty blockers don't mutilate your body.
Why did you let me do this? And I was a kid. What did I know? Right? And so I think we're really going to see that eventually, but it's sad what has to happen to get to that point, right?
And it's already happening actually right now over in England and Europe. There are court rulings coming down. People are coming forth and saying, hey, why did you let this happen to me?
Brian is most likely referring to Kiera Bell. Her case went to court in the UK and she won, saying that at 16, she was wrong to insist that, her words from her website, she was male. She says that she was rushed onto puberty blockers with little medical counseling. She says a year later she was offered testosterone, which she opted for. She doesn't specify how old she was at this point. She implies that she was 17, as she says that she did it a year after she started on puberty blockers, and she started the process to get puberty blockers at 16. But the fact that she doesn't specify and that the NHS guidelines say not to start this until 18 leads me to think that she likely was 18. The point being that when she chose to begin treatment that would cause permanent changes, she was either an adult or was very close to it. She says that at 20, she opted for a double mastectomy. Then at 23, she wanted to transition back to female. In her complaint, she says that she might be infertile. She doesn't know. But this isn't from puberty blockers. It's from the testosterone that she freely admits that she wanted. She most likely was an adult when she made this choice. But even if she wasn't, she was most definitely continuing the testosterone for at least a couple of years into adulthood. The fact that she chose to continue treatment to transition to male into her 20s negates her argument that she was a child when changes were too quickly thrust upon her. Bell also characterizes all treatment at the clinic as experimental, which may be where our panel here is getting their data. If they are taking the case of one adult who regretted treatment she chose as an adult to deny a different treatment to children because they might, when they reach adulthood, wish their parents hadn't assisted them in such a decision. I don't know all the details of the Bell case. Maybe they did rush to treatment with inadequate testing and counseling. It goes to show the need for guidelines, not the need to end all such treatment.
All right, Joe Biden condemns Texas abortion ban, celebrates killing babies in abortion.
Of course he does.
He does. And so this has to do with the heartbeat bill, what they call the heartbeat bill in Texas, that basically does not allow children after the age of about 6 weeks, which is when the fetal heartbeat is detected.
It's interesting that Georgia refers to 6-week-old embryos as children. I realize that pro-life people characterize embryos this way to make the point that embryos are individual people. But in reality, no one thinks this way. Google 6-week-old child, and these are the images that you get. A few of these clearly aren't 6-week-old babies, but you get the picture. None of these are embryos. The only place you get a picture of an embryo is in a suggested related search. Or think of it this way: who, when in a burning building and able to save only one, would opt for saving a test tube full of embryos over an 18-month-old baby? I hope no one, because a baby is a person. A bunch of embryos in a test tube are not people. I also defy you to go up to anyone and tell them about your 6-week-old child and have them think you are talking about an embryo. No, if you have an embryo growing inside you, you say that you are pregnant, that you are going to be a mother, not that you currently have a 6-week-old child. When a woman is 6 months along in her pregnancy, that's what it is, her pregnancy, not she has a 6-month-old baby. When we see a pregnant woman, we ask, how far along are you? Not how old is your unborn baby. The unborn are spoken of and recognized as a part of the mother. They aren't separate persons. If embryos were children, we would not measure their age from birth. We would measure their age from conception. A newborn baby would be a 40-week-old baby. A 12-week-old baby would be a 1-year-old. No one thinks this because the unborn are that. The unborn. They are not children.
To be murdered through abortion. And so Biden, of course, has flip-flopped on his views about 1 million times when it comes to abortion. It seems to be whatever will gain him the most as far as votes and things like that are
Political
concerned, or
advantage.
the most favor.
A politician would not do that, Georgia.
Yeah. So
Biden has changed his mind on abortion over the years, but he has not flip-flopped 1 million times. I myself have changed my mind on the subject. I really wish people would stop saying that someone has flip-flopped just because they changed their mind. Biden used to be opposed to federal funding for abortion, even in the case of rape and incest, but he was never opposed to abortion. He has always taken the stance of bodily autonomy. A woman has the right to choose. He opposed federal funding on the grounds that if abortion is against your religious beliefs, then you shouldn't have to pay tax dollars to support it. I held a similar view at one time. Biden now supports the use of tax money to fund abortions as he came to realize that women harmed from withholding those funds have real and serious problems that don't go away by denying them access to abortions. Biden has always personally felt that women should not have abortions, that it violates his beliefs as a Catholic. But he has also always taken the stance that it isn't his place to impose his religious views, his personal beliefs, on someone that doesn't hold those beliefs. This isn't a flip-flop. Does he say this to get votes? Maybe. I don't know. I can't read Biden's thoughts. Brian in Georgia can't either.
most of these heartbeat bills get stopped by a court, all right? But this one did not, because the Supreme Court decided to basically allow it to go into law. And so Biden had said that it violates a constitutional right that was basically established under Roe v. Wade. There is no constitutional right to abortion. It is not in the Constitution, or is it implied by the Constitution.
And a court can't create a right. That is not the job of a court.
Technically, Georgia and Roger are right, but for all practical purposes, they have completely missed the boat. Pun intended. First, as to Georgia, she's right that the words right to abortion do not appear in the Constitution. But we have many fundamental rights that are not spelled out in the Constitution. For example, the Constitution guarantees you the right to due process in a trial. But what exactly is due process is up to the courts to decide. The right to an attorney when you are on trial for your life was established by the Supreme Court in Powell versus Alabama in 1932. Prior to Powell, the guarantee of the Sixth Amendment right to have the assistance of counsel for his defense in a criminal trial applied only to federal trials, not state trials. In Powell, the Supreme Court determined that the 14th Amendment guaranteed the right of an attorney to state prosecutions as well as federal prosecutions. The right to having an attorney appointed to you if you could not afford one didn't come until almost 40 years later with Gideon versus Wainwright. The point is, the Constitution is and always was intended to be a framework from which the courts and the legislature would build whatever rights the people wanted, but those that fit within the framework. The right to counsel in a criminal trial was no stretch of the imagination and is now considered to be one of our most fundamental rights. Yet it is a right that was only fully established through interpretation of the Constitution by the court in the last 50 years. As to Roger, he is just flat out wrong. Creating rights is exactly the job of the court. They listen to the cases and determine what rights the parties have or should have under the Constitution in accordance with the law before them. This is a frequent talking point with Christians whenever the court finds rights within the Constitution that they don't like. But they sing an entirely different tune when the court finds a right that they support. If the court overturns Roe by finding a right to life of the unborn, they will have to create a right that is not explicitly in the Constitution. Lest you are thinking, wait a minute, Granny, doesn't the Fifth Amendment include a right to life? Indeed it does, but it only does so as to a person, and currently the law does not recognize the unborn as persons. It's why the panel here pushes hard to get people to think of the unborn as children, because a child is a person. So the panel here is complaining that the court created a right that isn't explicitly in the Constitution, and they aren't supposed to do that, while at the same time wanting the court to create a right that isn't explicitly in the Constitution.
So he doesn't even understand our basic political system that he's there sworn to uphold. So the court can't create these rights. The rights, as we understand them, are things that we can derive that are given to us by God as our creator.
And Roger completely falls off the boat. Biden doesn't understand our political system because the rights in our Constitution were given to us by God. What planet did Roger just fly in from that he is so confused as to think that the U.S. Constitution was written by God? Or is Roger elevating James Madison, the author of the Bill of Rights, to God status? Are all of the writers of the Constitution gods now?
And I am quite certain that God would not give us the right to kill our children. That's something he directly condemns in Scripture all throughout.
God condemns killing children? Have you ever read your Bible, dude? 1 Samuel 15:3. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, oxen, sheep, camel, and donkey. Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take him out and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gate of the place where he lives. And they shall say to the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. Exodus 12:29 through 30. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Psalm 137:9. Blessed shall be he who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Jeremiah 19:9. And I will make them eat the flesh of their sons and their daughters, and everyone shall eat the flesh of his neighbor in the siege and in the distress with which their enemies and those who seek their life afflict them. 2 Kings 15:16. At that time Menahem sacked Tifsah and all who were in it and its territory from Tisra on, because they did not open it to him. Therefore he sacked it and ripped open all the women in it who were pregnant. This last one, Menahem, was considered an evil king of Israel. But the evil, according to the Bible, was that he didn't turn from the sins of Jeroboam. Nowhere does the Bible say that the ripping open of the wombs of the pregnant women was evil. And of course, don't forget all the babies that God drowned in the flood. If this was really a history book and not a book of fictional stories, this would be a lot of killing of children.
He talks too about the fact that, this has been, Roe v. Wade was established 50 years ago. We've done this for 50 years. That's the precedent. So we need to keep doing it. Well, just because it's older doesn't make it right? Just because we've done it for 50 years and killed 60 million babies in the U.S. doesn't make it a right thing to do.
If you word it for what it actually is, then its absurdity becomes apparent. Hey, we've murdered babies for 50 years. That gives us the right to keep on murdering babies.
I know of literally no one that thinks that Roe shouldn't be overturned because it's the way it always has been. I remember pre-Roe days. It wasn't that long ago. Roe shouldn't be overturned because when abortion is outlawed, the number of abortions doesn't decrease. Only the number of safe abortions decreases. If you want to save babies, then keep abortion legal. Making abortion illegal just increases the number of mothers that die and are injured from unsafe abortions. If women are provided safe abortions when they need them, then they can go on to have children when they are ready, and thus you have saved the babies that woman has after her abortion. Okay, I have to mention the look on George's face when I paused to do some writing. You can get some funny poses from anyone by pausing them at just the right moment, but this one was so funny I just had to share it.
If you word it for what it actually is, then its absurdity becomes apparent. Hey, we've murdered babies for 50 years. That gives us the right to keep on murdering babies.
Right.
Because that's what abortion actually is. We don't say it to be harsh or to be bold. That's just what it is biblically understood and logically and scientifically understood.
No, that's just the way you have been taught to see it from people who were politically motivated to get more votes. The vast majority of Protestants didn't have a problem with abortion until 1980, when Jerry Falwell used it as his rallying cry to help get people to vote for Reagan over Jimmy Carter, even though Reagan was far more pro-choice than Carter until he became a Republican and saw the light. It was then and continues to be the unifying issue that holds the Republican Party together. The abortion issue isn't about human rights. It is, and always has been, about politics.
And so when you put it in its real terms, then you can kind of see how ridiculous this is. And as you were mentioning, Roger, you didn't even understand how the system really works. And based on his logic, what about the previous Supreme Court rulings before Roe v. Wade that endorsed things like segregation?
Mm-hmm.
Is that now the precedent? Is that now the law of the land? There should be segregation for the rest of time because the Supreme Court made a bad ruling years ago? No, if they make a bad ruling, then let's fix the bad ruling to make it a good one and a right one.
And that's exactly why no one is making this argument. Good job. You knocked down the straw man. You win a Keepy doll.
So one of the main reasons that the Supreme Court, it seems they chose not to take this up on the initial appeal concerns that were brought from various pro-choice groups and the ACLU, is that it doesn't have a government enforcement mechanism. Rather, it's a civil enforcement mechanism. So any citizen of Texas can bring a charge against another who they think has been involved in or aided and abetted an abortion.
First, it's interesting that Roger can now read the minds of the Supreme Court justices. The U.S. Supreme Court sidestepped the Texas abortion law by doing nothing when the law went into effect. They didn't issue an opinion or a position paper or even a press release. No one knows why they chose not to intervene prior to the law going into effect. Yet somehow, Swami Roger can read their minds and knows it's because of the enforcement mechanism of the law. This doesn't even make sense. How would the enforcement mechanism of the law affect whether or not the court wanted to intervene and issue an injunction to halt the law for being unconstitutional? Not only that, Roger doesn't even get the enforcement mechanism right. The law says any person, other than an officer or an employee of the state or local government entity of this state, may bring a civil action against a person who performs or induces an abortion in violation of this subchapter. It isn't limited to citizens of Texas. It says any person. You could be an illegal alien. You could be from Botswana. If there are people on other planets, they could bring suit too. So hustle on up, buckaroos. It's open season on anyone who provides services to women that could aid in an abortion.
There are some concerns, as Brian mentioned, with this bill, just like with any of the other so-called heartbeat bills. It relies on the abortionist to find the heartbeat, and they have a monetary incentive not to. They're going to get paid if they can't find the heartbeat.
Roger is way off here. First, the law is quite explicit about the method for determining if there is a heartbeat and the documentation of the findings. In making such a determination under subsection B, the physician must use a test that is consistent with the physician's good faith and reasonable understanding of standard medical practice and appropriate for the estimated gestational age of the unborn child and the condition of the pregnant woman and her pregnancy. A physician making a determination under subsection B shall record in the pregnant woman's medical record the estimated gestational age of the unborn child, the method used to estimate the gestational age, and the test used for detecting a fetal heartbeat, including the date, time, and results of the test. So the implication that doctors are just going to say, nope, I didn't hear a heartbeat, we can do an abortion, isn't going to be the case. And in fact, it is not what we are seeing. The abortion clinics in Texas are no longer doing abortions. The risk is way too high for the small benefit of payment for services. Roger says, well, they won't get paid if they find a heartbeat. But the amount of money that a doctor gets for an abortion pales in comparison to the $10,000 penalty for an abortion under this law. In addition, the person who sues can also collect attorney's fees and costs. So the stakes of losing far outweigh any benefit from dishonestly saying there was no heartbeat if medical testing in fact found a heartbeat. And this is what we are seeing, that abortion clinics in Texas are no longer doing abortions.
It really doesn't address the issue of the pills, abortifacient pills that can be used, all of those types of things.
Once again, Roger has absolutely no knowledge of what he is talking about. He obviously hasn't read the law or even the news about the law. Except as provided by Section 171.205, a physician may not knowingly perform or induce an abortion on a pregnant woman if the physician has detected a fetal heartbeat for the unborn child as required by Section 171.203. Giving a woman an abortifacient drug would be inducing an abortion. A physician can't prescribe abortifacient drugs for a woman in which the doctor detects a fetal heartbeat as defined by the law, because that induces an abortion. What Roger might mean is that if a woman is R-word and asks for a morning after pill even before she knows she's pregnant, that would not be covered by the law. Is that the scenario that Roger is trying to prevent? Make sure if women are R-word and get pregnant that they still have the baby because what? Jesus loves all the little zygotes of the world? Try explaining that one to your daughter. Honey, God loves you so much that he gave you this constant reminder of the crime that was perpetrated against you, so that it will make permanent changes to your body and possibly ruin your life. But God will be with you, and so will we. But only if you stay pregnant. If you take that pill that allows nature to take its course by preventing implantation, then God will hate you, and we won't accept you anymore either, because only God is allowed to murder people, not us. But it's your choice. When I reached this point in my script, I realized that I had way more material crammed into one show than I intended. So I just want to quickly comment that the title of their video comes from a story that they get to next, that Harvard has chosen an atheist as the head chaplain for the university chaplains. As much as we say that atheism isn't a religion, and it isn't, atheists still need support when we go through a rough time. If Harvard has counselors for atheists as well as the religious, good on you. We need more of these. Chris Attlee, atheist pastor, maybe they have a job for you at Harvard. Live your life.